Good evening, all. Good evening, good evening, good evening. Good evening. We have a full house this evening. I think we could have sold this tasting 2 or 3 times over. Thank you all for joining, putting your hands up to come along. This is going to be I've actually had a sneak preview of all 6 wines. This is going to be a stunning tasting. We have Jason lined up. Of course, the Burgundy Maestro is with us. And we have 3 growers. We have youth represented. We have an old master represented. Well, and someone in between. But I'll let Jason introduce the winemakers. I couldn't be more excited about this one this evening. Vosne-Romanée. I would say if I had to pick one village, my heart would be there. But Nuit has really overperformed in 2019, as you're about to see and about to hear. So two villages that we will taste this evening. We kick off wine number 1. If you haven't got your sheet to hand, wine number 1 is by Guillaume Tardy. So get that one in the glass. But I'm going to link over to Jason. I think we're all in. I'm going to link over to Jason to say a few words, and then hand over to one of the stars in the aisles. Jason, how are you doing today?
Yeah, evening, Tom. Yeah, very well, very well. Looking forward to this as well. Evening, everyone. As you know, I may be a little biased towards the wines of Nuit-Saint-Georges, but I hopefully won't let that come through this evening. Certainly not until we get to wine number 4, anyway. But yeah, lovely to have you all here again. Obviously, we've done the past four sessions. We've been in the Côte de Beaune, so at long last, we've arrived in the Côte de Nuit. We put Nuit and Vosne together, not just because of their geographical proximity, but there's that little area between Nuit and Vosne where there's some Nuits that taste like Vosne and almost some Vosnes with hints of Nuit about them. So it seems a very sensible comparison today. And actually, funnily enough, looking through the wines we've got on tasting, all the 3 Nuit-Saint-Georges come from that part north of Nuit, next to Vosne. So that will be especially interesting. And I think, well, we're going to start off with getting some background both on the area and the vintage from ALBERIC BICHOT, the big cheese at BICHOT, and obviously who own Domaine de Clos Frantin in Nuit-Saint-Georges. But one thing I did want to mention, when we were tasting in the Côte de Beaune, we talked about how certain appellations have actually really benefited from climate change, particularly Pommard and certainly some of the Vosnes, where perhaps in the past tannins were slightly rustic, wines borderline mature, just hints of green about them perhaps in more difficult vintages. And I think Nuit-Saint-Georges falls into that same category. It's absolutely blossomed over the last 10 years. I think partly because obviously there's some serious winemakers there, but the nature of the vintages has just meant they've found ripeness easier to come by, which has allowed them a slightly more gentle extraction, which I think has helped the refinement of the tannins and produce wines with greater aromatic qualities and more finesse. Now I say that, and hopefully we'll see that when we taste a little bit later on. So look, let's go to the locals and find out what's really been going on in 2019. If I could start with ALBERIC, if you're there. Good evening, ALBERIC. I think can't quite hear you. We'll just get Tom to unmute you. There he's just coming back there. So as you said earlier, ALBERIC is in charge at BICHOT, one of the real quality negociant houses based in Beaune. They also own 3 different domains: Langue de Paquis and Chablis, Domaine de Pavillon, which is their Côte de Beaune operation, and then Domaine de Clos Frantin in Côte de Nuit, based in Nuit-Saint-Georges, which has an astonishing collection of great vineyards. Good evening, ALBERIC. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Yeah, I mean, you're very well placed just to give us some background about the vintage, because you've got vineyards in most of the Côte d'Or, as well as Chablis, obviously. Perhaps just touching on those 2 areas, but focusing mainly on the Côte de Nuit. What are your impressions of 2019?
Okay, so the big cheese with we'll talk. That's it. Do you mean I'm a camembert or something like that? Thank you.
The grand fromage.
Okay. No, the vintage 2019 was quite complicated and very strange. At first, we had not typical winter because we had almost no winter. A lot of water shortage, more than 50 to 70% compared to normal January or February. The autumn-winter period was almost 3 degrees above normal figures, which was the highest temperature on average in the past 25 years. Then, so this is why I can say there was no real winter. And by the end of March, the vegetation has already gotten so much sun that we could foresee a very early start for the vines. But several weeks later, mainly in the beginning of April, we had a terrible night on the 5th of April, as we suffered once again from frost. Depending on where you are based, I mean your vineyards, we have more or less suffered from the frost. But in the Côte de Nuit, it was a little bit less hard than in the Côte de Beaune, but some of our vineyards have suffered. In Vosne-Romanée, more especially in les Malconsorts, we estimate we could have lost in one night probably 10 to 15% of the potential crop. Then we had, fortunately, a beautiful spring days. But I take my notes. But June was really a month of heavy contrast. The first few days were very hot, very dry, no rain. And can you imagine the temperature in La Côte d'Or, on the Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, even exceeded 30 degrees Celsius. It was very unusual. You were talking about the climate changing. Climate change, it's one more evidence of what is happening. But after the mid of June, flowering is already well under the way. And since the 16th, 17th of June, rainfall again. So all along the year, we had sun, rain. July was hot also, 2 to 3 degrees more than the normal. A lot of water deficit, 50% compared to a normal year. And between the 5th and the 19th of August, raining again and again and again. By the 20th of August, the Pinot Noir grapes were now getting red, at least. Unfortunately, we had great sunshine in early September. The sunshine beat records, and rainfall was once again lacking, fortunately. So at the end, at least for Vosne-Romanée, we started to pick the grapes on the 16th of September, and we were quite happy. This is for the climate. It's okay, Jason?
Yeah, presumably you began picking in the Côte de Beaune
yes.
About a week earlier?
Yes, at home, in my home in Pomar, we started on the 9th.
Yeah. And in terms of the hydric stress, did vines shut down a little bit because of the lack of rain, or was there enough water in the soil from left over from the rain before Christmas and during the winter months?
It depends really on the soil of your vineyards. If you have more limestone or not, if you are in altitude or not, if you are in the bottom of the slopes. So it depends really where you are located, and it depends also on the age of your vines. The elder the vines are, the best capacity of getting water from the soil is okay. if you have young vines, it's of course more difficult.
A question that we were discussing quite a lot when we were looking at Poligny and Chassagne was really the difficulty in choosing the perfect date to begin harvest. Did you find that was difficult, or was it a fairly straightforward decision?
No, you're right. It was very difficult to find the right balance between the acidity, the tannins, the sugar contents. Every year it's difficult, but last year it was a big challenge. We had to take risk in any case.
Yeah. And in terms of overall yields in the Côte de Nuit for you, how much were you down? I know it varied a bit between vineyards.
Well, on average, it's minus 20%. So for the Malconsorts, we will test on the total. So the yield is 30, little bit less than 30 hectoliters per hectare. Normally, let's say we are more looking for 35, 38 max.
Mind you, you have almost 2 hectares of Malconsorts, so that's not too bad.
It depends the quantity you drink.
Absolutely. Great answer. Well, thank you for that, ALBERIC. We'll come back to you a little later if we may, but I think it's probably time to head over towards the first wine, and I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Guillaume Tardy, who is joining us from his rather nice-looking cellar in Vosne-Romanée. Good evening, Guillaume.
Good evening. Hi, everybody. Happy to be with you.
Good to see you. It seems a bit cheeky to ask you to present a wine from Nuit-Saint-Georges when you're based in Vosne-Romanée, but it's such a nice vineyard. I think it would be really exciting for people to taste this wine. Just before we do, could you just give us a little bit of background on the domain?
Yeah, so we run 5.5 hectares domain only on the Côte de Nuit. We have 5 village wines from like Fissin, Gevrey, Chambol, Nuit, Saint-Georges, Vosne-Romanée, a little bit of Nuit-Saint-Georges Premier Cru aux Argias, and a little bit of Chaignots. The good point is that all our village wines are and Premier Cru are single parcel wines, so it gives more definition to the terroir expression. And the good news for this year is that I just got 1 hectare, 0.4 of Côte de Nuit village located in Combe.
One sole parcel?
1 big parcel, all vines, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, so I'm pretty happy with that, even if it's not Vosne-Romanée again. And about the story, my father started as a métayer of Méoca Musée in '66 after his father. So he used to work a big bit of his life at the Domaine Méo with Mr. Jaillet and some others, like Four Brothers. And then I came back in '97, and from that we did a lot of efforts to get new vineyards because we had to give back the vineyards of Méo in '07. So now we own almost everything except the Haute-Côte, the Côte de Nuit, and the Chaignots.
Yeah, that was a shame you had to give those back because you had some nice parcels from Mayo, didn't you?
Yeah, we had a Vosne-Romanée Premier Cru Les Chaumes, some Nuit-Boudot Premier Cru, and some Clos, but that helped us to start our own domain, and we must be happy with that, you know.
So if you include the 1.4 hectares you've just bought, how many hectares do you have in total now?
Now we will be 5.5 because I will release the Passe tout Grain to a young winemaker in Vosne-Romanée.
Okay. And obviously you've got vineyards in both Nuit-Saint-Georges and Vosne-Romanée. I mean, they're very close. Was there much difference locally in the weather between the two areas?
the thing is that we are all, our Nuit-Saint-Georges vineyards are located on the north side of Nuit-Saint-Georges, so Vosne-Romanée side. And it's true that on this side, some vineyards can give the same particularity than the Vosne-Romanée, especially for the tannins. And if you look at the map for my Nuit-Saint-Georges Bas de Combe, you will see that it's surrounded by Vosne-Romanée vineyards. Like on the east, you've got Vosne-Romanée Les Réas, just in north, Vosne-Romanée Les Chaumes, Premier Cru, and on the west, on the slope, you've got the Nuit-Boudot, Premier Cru. So this vineyard is stuck in the middle of Vosne-Romanée, at the end of the Vosne-Romanée vineyards in the south part. So, so when you will taste it, you will probably feel some ressemblance. I don't know how you say in English.
No, exactly right.
Yeah, looking the same than the Vosne-Romanée expression. Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at the wine then. So it's Nuit-Saint-Georges Bas de Combe, as you're saying, surrounded by great vineyards, just below Les Boudot, I think. It's,
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And these are really old vines, aren't they?
Yeah, my Bas de Combe were planted in 37, so they are more than 80 years old. And we are lucky because the vineyard start, there's almost half an hectare, and the vineyard starts from the Vaulx-Réas and go up to the Boudot. It go all the way through. And the top part of Les Bas de Combe is very sandy, and the soil is almost like Boudot. So, so these vineyards make some very nice things every year.
Yeah, so the difference between the soil at the top and the soil at the bottom is quite significant?
You can see it on the bottom. It will be a bit more clay, and on the top, the half part on the top will be more with limestone and more with a bit of sand. Very dry, draining soil. Very shallow and draining.
So actually, a mix of the two would be a nice combination.
Yeah. So yeah. So you will see when you will taste it, you've got some power and some elegance stuff. So it makes something quite complete every year. Yeah.
And as they were very old vines, did they manage to get down and find some moisture in the soil?
We've got very big roots in this vineyard. So I think it has helped to get some water on a drier vintage like this year or 19s, but on the top part because of the very draining soil. Even with the deep roots, it was complicated to get big berries. It makes almost just tiny mirandage, small berries. Yeah.
Yeah.
But quality is there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Small berries are a nightmare for yields, but fantastic for
yeah. Yeah. That's true, and that's the good point in this vineyard, like in my Vosne as well. There's always tiny berries, but the quality and the concentration is great. It's very great. But the problem is that even if you make great quality, you always need a little bit of juice as well. You know.
In terms of new oak, what are you doing here?
For Les Bas de Combe, I use an average of 35% of new oak.
Yeah, it really doesn't show.
No, but the thing is that this wine is quite bodied. It has, you can see the big backbone structure, but with very supple and very silky tannins. So it handles very well the oak. And I always use, for all my wines, I use a very light toast, long and very light toast. Like this, it doesn't burn the inside of the barrel, and it doesn't give a toasted expression. It respects the fruit character of each wine. And I always use Allier oak, and the Allier will bring more finesse with his tannins than oak from Les Vosges, for example, which will bring more strength and more power.
Yeah. Are you using any stems in any of your wines?
No, so regarding the winemaking, I always do so 100% destem. I love wines with stems, but my way of making the wine doesn't go with that, because I love when there's a really big window of drinkability of my wines from very young to old. And so I do all my wineries temperature controlled. I can control separately each vat's temperature. And like this, I can do a proper cold maceration at 10 degrees for almost even more than 1 week. And then the ferment will start very slowly, and then the yeast will work slowly, so everything will go slow. And then the temperature will rise up in 1 more week up to 31, 32, and finish the sugar of the vat. And during all that time, I just do pumping overs. So taking the juice from the bottom and wet the top of the vat to not extract too much tannins and preserve the fruit character. And after that, when the sugar are finished, I will start plunging and keeping the hot with my vats at 32 degrees for 1 more week. And this will extract softly the tannins, more by like infusion, if you want. And just a few pigeage between 3 and 4, 5 pigeage maximum, depends on the vintage. But for vintage like 19, there was such a nice natural concentration and ripeness that everything came out very easily. And I did just 2 or 3 pigeage per cuvée, not more. And then the tannins are very supple, yeah.
When did you begin picking?
Sorry, I started picking on the 16th of September, because as said ALBERIC, we had to wait the end of the phenolic maturity because of the weird weather. Something was stuck, and even if the sugars kept going high, the phenolic physiologic maturity, sorry, was not perfectly there. So we had to wait at the limit of the rhythm before picking the grapes. But me, you know, I'm always one of the first to start, and I'm pretty happy because the bad comb was picked at 13.6 natural, so which is still reasonable. And after Malo, now just before bottling, the pH are 3.5, and total acidity 3.52. So which gives a very good balance and kept a lot of freshness.
Showing really well, and actually the quality of tannins is beautiful. It's so well integrated. It's a very seamless wine, and yet the concentration is very evident to me.
But are you tasting the wine at the moment or not?
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe I will get some out of the barrel.
That really is going to be as fresh as you can get it, really. So it hasn't. But I mean, I think this is a great example of what's been achieved in the 2019 by some of these red wines. Great concentration. But
like this, you can see the color from the cellar.
Yeah.
You see, the color is not dark like a too overripe vintage. This is a deep red, but still a ruddy color. And for me, the 19s show a very pretty face of Burgundy classical wine, even if the sugar is a bit higher than usual. But with wines under 13.8, you can still keep this classical taste and balance with a nice freshness here.
Yeah, it's still very Burgundian, still very Pinot. Thanks, Guillaume. Just one last question. I'm sure you agree. I think this is a vintage where the wines will age very well. But how happy are you with your 19s overall? If they taste,
sorry.
If they taste as good as this, you must be very happy.
No, I'm very, very pleased because it's from the beginning. The wines were showing amazingly well. Tannins were very supple, very caressing. The quality of the tannins of the 19s, for me, is great. I'm very happy with that. And not only mine, but in general, I mean. And there's everything in these wines to be one of the best of the last 5 or 10 vintages. For yeah, this is like a caress.
Well, bearing in mind how good recent vintages have been, that's great. Thank you, Guillaume. That's terrific. That's a great start to the tasting. We may come back to you later, but lovely to see you for now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, on to wine. Well, wines number 2 and number 3. I'm going to talk you through. So for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to be Amélie Berthaut, which is an odd combination. So Amélie Berthaut is, well, she's part of the Berthaut-Gerbet. Her father is Denis Berthaut, and her mother is Madame Gerbet. She took over her father's domain back in 2013, and at the same time has been taking back some vineyards from her mother's domain, which is in Vosne-Romanée, in fact, which is why we'll be tasting one of her wines, one of her loans later. She's now got 18 hectares in total. She's based in Fissin, and most of her father's vineyards, that's where they came from. So it's really more on her mother's side where she's picked up Vosne, Clos, Suchots, Vosne-Petit-Mont, things like that have come there. But her father is very well known for making his Fissins and was exceptionally hard working in the vineyard. And I think in many ways, the real work she had to do initially with the wines for Fissin was perhaps more in the cellars than in the vineyards, because the work in the vineyards was already very good. She is working organically, although she's not actually certified. Interestingly, and it will be a theme throughout this evening, she is her use of stems. She's always been a little reluctant to get involved in stems too much. Her husband actually, who makes his own little micro couvery in the village in the Oak Coat, is a big lover of stems, and they often, I'm sure, have lots of discussions around the dinner table about whether she should be using 10%, 20%. Anyway, certainly in this vintage, which seems to me a perfect vintage for using stems, she used around about 20%, I think maybe 15% on this cuvee. But that was probably more than she's done previously. But they were so beautifully ripe that it seemed the perfect vintage to do that. And obviously, for those who don't know, stems obviously bring more freshness, possibly a little bit more structure, and some interesting aromatic qualities. And I think this wine probably shows all of those things. She, like Guillaume with his Bas de Combe, she had a lot of small berries again, so there's a very easy natural concentration, so she didn't need to do a lot of pichon, much more pumping over, very more gentle extraction, as Guillaume mentions, probably more infusion than extraction. This particular wine comes from 2 parcels, Au-Dessous de la Rivière and Les Réas, which again, good plots, actually just below the Nuit Premier Crues, so on the southern part of the village. There's about 20% UO. And she said the colours came so easily, so she could be very, very gentle with the extraction. Sadly, there is one downside. In fact, we received it today, received the allocation for 2019. She did lose quite a lot of fruit in this vintage, and some of the yields are down by as much as 40–45%. I think there's one cuvée down even higher than that. Vosne was down about 30%. So sadly, that's the price we've got to pay for having exceptional quality. I think, I mean, this wine to me still seems like a little baby, plenty of concentration, nothing too forced, plenty of colour, but it seems natural rather than over extracted. Quite possibly it might shut down a little bit because there's a lot of power and a lot of structure, but it should open up really nicely after 4 or 5 years' time, and strikes me as a wine that should drink well for, say, 12 or 15 years. But just a really nice example of those. I think one thing I would say about Amélie is she has got some great vineyards now, as I mentioned, Echezeaux, Clos, Suchots, Vosne-Petit-Mont. But I think if you really want to see where her talent is, you need to try Fissaz. So in a way, it's sort of lesser appellations, but the things she's doing with them are fantastic, and the wines are brilliant. And I'm very happy to report they still cost quite a lot less than the wines from Vosne-Romanée. So that's Amélie Berthaut's wine. So moving on to wine number 3. This is another addition to the Stannary portfolio this year, following the purchase of Domaine Direct. It's I suppose our 4th domain based in Nuit-Saint-Georges after Gouges, Chaignots, and Thibault de Gerbet. Slightly older domain. This goes back, I think, as far as I can see, back to about 1880. So there's plenty of history there. I was writing it up today, and I wrote maybe as a little bit old school in the sense that the wines are not over manipulated in the winery. There isn't a huge amount of new oak. Very gentle sort of élevage in the cave, and the wines age really well. Classic old school Nuit in that sense. I think it's a really interesting domain. If you want to have an opinion, I suppose, of all different terroirs of Nuit-Saint-Georges, it's a really good one to do. It's about 8 hectares, and it's spread over lots of different vineyards, both from north and south of the village. This one lies to the north, so we're still on the Vosne side. And actually, it lies just above Chaignots, which we'll be tasting later from Antoine. So we're right up on the rocky part of Nuit-Saint-Georges here, where there is a lot of stone and more limestone, obviously. And I think that comes through on the wine, actually. They're not big users of new oak. They're not trying to round out the wine overly. Very happy to let that stoniness and minerality come through. Yeah, and as you see, I think there's a little bit more pigeage perhaps than you would find on Guillaume's wines. A little bit more structure, a little bit more tannin. Again, really nice acidity and bite on the finish. You can see why that's a wine that will age very well. The attack is full of fruit, actually rather polished tannins at the front, and then you get this lovely acidity, freshness, and structure coming through on the back palate. Quite possible that wine will shut down post bottling for, I don't know, 5 to 7 years, but then it should emerge beautifully. Hugely concentrated, but in a nicely understated way, I think. I mean, the vines here really old. Like Guillaume's, actually planted in 1937. I gather a part has been replanted in the last 4 years, and obviously they wouldn't have gone into this. So this is really 82 vines at the time. I think that's giving them the natural concentration. It's an interesting vineyard, particularly so, I suppose, in a vintage like 2019, where there is this heat and warmth. You've got that stoniness and possibly a slightly cooler microclimate because you're halfway up the hill. And that's a great counterfoil for that extra heat. And we've spoken about this over the last fortnight or so. These slightly cooler sites are really coming to the fore now, and I think we'll see changes in the hierarchy of certain vineyards over the next 10 years if this climate change continues. A little bit of gloss, which I think comes from just being on that Vosne side, and also that extra heat. But again, there's some bad news. Smallest vintage since 1979. We're still waiting for official allocations to come through, but sadly there's not going to be a lot of anything, which is a great shame, because I think this is a wine of real promise.
Jason, just some comments rather than questions, but Ian saying Berthaut-Gerbet, Vosne-Romanée, village wine, really. I mean, both the first 2 wines are hugely overperforming for a village wine. I mean, these are very smart village wines, but perhaps that is a trait of the growers, but also of the vintage.
Yes, I suppose we've always said it in a way, what is a test of a great vintage? You have vintages which are good, which have great wines, but not great vintages. Perhaps we've always thought that the test of a great vintage is when the lesser wines, and at this moment we will consider those to be the village wines, when they really, really perform. And yeah, clearly both of those really perform. I mean, you're getting huge concentration on both of them, but there's this wonderful vibrancy as well. No, I think if we're looking for a bit of an indicator as to how good this vintage is, it's really important, I think, to taste village wines, and sometimes even some of the generic wines, the Bourgognes. If they're good, then you can be pretty confident the stuff further up the tree is going to be very exciting.
Thank you, Jason.
Right, so on to wine number 4, and at this point I'd like to introduce Antoine Gouges. Antoine, are you there?
Je suis là. Good evening, everybody.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Good to see you. We're saying it's an exciting vintage for the family Gouges, because it's 100 years since Henri made his first wine back in 1919. Can you believe?
Yeah, exactly. It's 100 years. So we are today the fourth generation to vinify at the Domaine with my cousin Gregory, and yeah, it was very, very exciting to have all this history. So we have some 1919 in the cellar, but we don't know exactly from which vineyard that was coming from.
And since Henri was in charge, so his two sons, Marcel and Michel, took over, and then 2 of their children took over,
Yes.
Christian and Pierre, and now it's yourself and Gregory. How do you divide up the work in the domain?
It's not really. We share all the work. I'm probably a bit more in the vineyard, and Gregory a bit more on the commercialization, and we vinified now together. I really started to work from the beginning in the vineyard to understand everything, and now I'm in charge since 2017 with Gregory. Christian is now retired, and Pierre is retired since 10 years, but they are still here with us, and they follow what we do.
Yeah. I mean, there's the wines of Domaine Gouges have an incredible reputation, both in terms of quality, but in terms of longevity as well. In many ways, some of the older vintages, almost you used to have to leave them 15 or 20 years before they would really show their quality. Have you and Gregory changed things over the last 10 years or so in terms of vinification, or even in terms of work in the vineyard, to change slightly the style of the wines?
I think there is many details we are working about the work in the vineyard, the vinification. We work organically since more than 10 years now. We keep the yield very low. Most of the vineyard is in grass since Pierre started to do it. My uncle started to do it in the 80s. So that start to be something we think about and change a bit, because with those very warm vintage we have, we get problem of concurrence between grass and vineyard. So we change that in the vineyard, and for the vinification, I think we try to be very soft with the grapes and to respect the berries the most as possible. So from the picking until the pressuring, we go very light and soft with the grapes, because in the vineyard of Nuit-Saint-Georges, especially in the north where we have most of our plots, the tannins are quite big and can be tough if you extract too much. So we try to extract like an infusion and to be very respectful of the grapes, to get a more finesse and more accessibility to have wine more approachable. And
one of the, I was going to say, one of the important things at Gouges was obviously the construction of the new, I call it new, it's not so new now, but in 2007 when you completed the Couverie, I think about a week before the harvest in 2007. I'm not sure if it had been built in England. It would have probably been completed a week after the harvest, but at least you guys got it ready on time. But from what I can gather, that having everything done by gravity allows you to keep the berries whole for a little bit longer, which allows you to get obviously much finer tannins, and also a more fragrant aromatic quality to the wines. Is that true?
Yeah, I think the fact to work by gravity keeps the whole berry, so you have a kind of carbonic maceration in the berry. So everything is distinct at the Domaine. The berry are a bit open, but the fact we work by gravity and go very soft with pigeage, bring fruity, more complex aromatic.
In terms of in the cellar, you don't use too much new oak, do you? You've increased it a little bit. Is it now 15–20%?
We are about 20% new oak. For les Chaignots, you're gonna test. It's 20 to 25%. We work with low amount of oak for all our cuvées, because we have only vineyard and cuvée from Nuit-Saint-Georges, and our goal is to show the identity and the personality of the terroir. So we use the barrel pour accompagner, to follow the wine, but we don't want them to show the wood.
Well, it seems a good moment then to talk about Chaignots. I chose Chaignots really to taste this evening, partly because it tasted really good when I tasted it.
Good news.
but also, I'd say Gouges is very well known for Proulier, Porret, Les Saint-Georges, Vaucrin, which are on the south side of Nuit. So I thought it would be really interesting to look at something from the north. We mentioned Champs-Perdrix earlier. Obviously, Chaignots is just below that. But can you tell us a little bit about the vineyard?
Yeah, so Chaignots is our only vineyard, is situated in the north of the appellation. It's a vineyard situated at the bottom of the slope, with brown soil, with alluvium coming from the Combe, from the valley, and it's a vineyard that is 40 years old now. That's one of the last that Henri bought. He bought it in 1965, so one of the last plot from the Domaine. And that was a plot which was in grass since 30 years. And because the yield was quite high, about 40–45, and we wanted to get it lower, so it was in grass until 4 years now, and we decided to take it off because the vine was a bit tired, and now it come back to a normal yield for the Domaine. For example, in 2019 we are about 30 hectoliters per hectare.
Okay.
Which is quite high for 2019. In general, the average yield at the Domaine is 25 hectoliters. So it's good for us in 19, the Chaignots.
You said, yeah, the vines are now about 40 years old. The average age of the vines throughout the domain are of a similar age, or
I would consider it as a young vine for the domain. Most of our vineyard is about 50, 60 years old. We try to replant the vineyard small part by small part to keep this level, to keep this age.
I mean, this wine I think is showing aromatically really, really well. Is it a cuvée you particularly like in 2019?
I think Chaignots is showing very well since the beginning. During the vinification, it was already very aromatic, showing it's full-bodied, it's ripe, but you've got the freshness and you've got the acidity. Nice concentration and good balance for me with the Chaignots. And I think I particularly like 2019 for this balance and this more classic style we used to see now more very ripe vintage, and I like the freshness of the 90s.
Yeah, there's a lovely purity to this wine, and even a sense of finesse. You have no sense that it was a hot vintage. It's really well controlled, and the tannins are beautifully seamless. So no, it's a lovely wine. And just to finish, Antoine, I would imagine this wine should age very well for 25 years.
I think with the concentration, we can go to 20-25 years with no problem, but I think it would be approachable in 4 or 5 years. You have to consider this wine is not in bottle yet. We will do the bottling next week, so it's blend. It's the sample come from stainless steel tank. Everything is blend. I think it's showing already very well, but the potential of aging is very good. The concentration, I said that we try to make the wine approachable, but we really want to keep our identity, which is wine to keep. That's why we still do low yield and work with the same vineyard and the control in the vineyard.
Well, I think it works. It's a lovely wine, and as you say, it's already delicious, but it's going to be even better. So yeah, thank you, Antoine. Well done. Good news.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think Tom can tell you about that. We've got a Gouges special offer, I think, coming out later this week. So Tom can talk about that a little bit later. But thank you, Antoine. Just before we go back to ALBERIC and have a look at his Malconsorts, we'll go via another vineyard in Vosne-Romanée, and wine number 5, the Vosne-Romanée Les Suchots from Domaine Confuron-Cotetidot, which is run by Yves Confuron, who some of you may know also makes the wines at Domaine de Courcelles in Primeur. He's not quite sure how he manages to do both. He's obviously a very busy man, but he does a good job. Very different approach to one or two of the other wines that we've tasted here this evening. So it's 100% stems on this wine. I once, when I was tasting with his father, said, "Well, why do you not destem?" And he just looked at me quizzically and said, "Well, I haven't got a destemmer." So it's about as straightforward as you can get. So yeah, all the stems are kept. Very, very little new oak at all. Not much manipulation in the cellars. The wines are bottled relatively late. They're bottled around June, July, 2 years after. So this will be bottled in June next year, so probably 3 or 4 months after a lot of the other domains bottle their wines. And the other important thing to say is Yves also picks quite late. I think he began harvesting on the about a week after both ALBERIC and Antoine, about the 23rd of September. It has a lot of old vines, and wines are often quite powerful, but they can close up quite a lot. They have a lot of natural tannin, which is perhaps exaggerated by using a lot of whole bunch. But when you give them 15 and 20 years, they suddenly come alive. I've drunk things like 78 Village Vosne, I don't know, 5 years ago, whilst there, and it tastes like a 10-year-old wine, still full of vigour, full of colour as well, actually, and non-oxidized colour, still very red. So, I mean, this is a wine, I dread to think how long this might last, but I'm not sure I'll be around to drink it when it's fully mature, especially at Magnum. But it's a really good plot. He's got 2 hectares of Suchots, one on either side of the vineyard. I think that gives a really nice combination. And it's rare for someone to have so much Suchots, and it's rare that we're able to actually allow people to have the 6 or 12 bottles that they often want. So yeah, not a wine for the impatient, but for those just starting out in their wine collecting career, a great wine to look at drinking in about 20 years' time. And then, so finally, on to the last wine, the Vosne Malconsorts. We'll bring back ALBERIC. The floor is yours, ALBERIC. This is from your little vineyard of, as we said, 1.75 hectares.
That's all, yes. Sorry.
I describe it this afternoon as a Grand Cru masquerading as a Premier Cru. Is that a fair comment about Malconsorts?
Oh, I'm very embarrassed, as you know. What I know and what everyone knows, if you understand why La Tâche from the Petit Domaine of DRC is so good, it's because La Tâche is really the neighbor of the Malconsorts. La Tâche touch Malconsorts. So La Tâche is good, for sure. No, Malconsorts is probably one of the top Premier Cru of Vosne-Romanée. Like you were talking about the Suchots. I love the Suchots. I love the Regnault, les Petits Monts. No, it's a great parcel. We are not so many to produce Malconsorts. I think we are only 6 or 7. Total area is around 6 hectares, I think. And so it's our biggest parcel, biggest single plot in La Côte de Nuit. If we compare with our other vineyards in La Côte de Nuit, like Chaignots, Grand Chaignots, Champs-Perdrix, or even Le Richebourg, Malconsorts is the largest one. Richebourg, you see, we produce only 1 barrel. It's a nightmare, but we love to do that.
one barrel is better than no barrels. So how old are the vines here in Malconsorts?
So it's an average of 42 years. And our objective, our target is like Antoine was saying, 60 years is really the optimum average we are targeting. So year after year, like Antoine said, we try to replace, but 40 years is a little bit young for us.
And is it just one parcel, or is it several little different bits of Malconsorts?
Mostly 2 different parcels. One more on the slopes, and one more on the bottom of the slope. So it's very interesting to mix the two terroirs, because you have the power of the bottom and the finesse, the elegance of the slope.
I mean, we've talked with both Antoine and Guillaume about whole bunch. Do you use any whole bunch here? Yes.
We have no religion. We are not orthodox for that. When it's possible, we do it. We never decide, okay, this year we will keep 50% or 80 or 10. It's really on the sorting table, we make the decision. When the bunch is really ripe, we keep it. So in 19, the ripeness, as you said already, was there. So we have a little bit more than the fourth. So around 30% of whole bunch.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of vinification, Did you do anything differently? Did you do a bit less pigeage than normal? Or?
Yes, if we compare with 18 vintage, which was more generous in terms of volume, no, it's true that we try to do things a little bit softer than usual. And more we see that the less we work, the best wine we can make. So it's a good news.
And in terms of the three vintages, it's an amazing trilogy, 18, 19, 20. Stylistically, where does 19 fit in those three? It's fresher than 18?
Let's say that, so for the 20 vintage, it's a little bit maybe early to consider, but what was so surprising for all of us in the winery is we were so frightened. Nous avions peur at the end of August and early September because of the potential sugar. So we were a little bit mixed, but at the end, the big surprise is that this vintage is so well balanced, so classic somewhere, that a Pommard is a Pommard, a Nuit-Saint-Georges, Vosne-Romanée. It's a big surprise to have at the end a very classic vintage, which can express the identity of each parcel, each terroir. It's a great news. We cannot compare with 2010, but somewhere we can. In terms of sunshine, we can compare with 2003, but 2003 is completely different, fortunately.
I mean, it seems, I mean, tasting all these wines today, they all seem to have harnessed the heat of the vintage. And what's so lovely about them, they still taste of Pinot Noir.
Yes, yes. So what can we say? That the Pinot, the nature is coming back in any case. This is something we cannot explain, but this is what we can experiment at least.
Yeah.
And probably, I don't know, because we cannot compare, but probably since we decided to go to the organic viticulture, we started at the end of around 2009, 2010. We've got the official certification since 2014, and probably it helps to reveal the identity of the vines, for sure.
Do you find you tend to get slightly lower yields working organically?
No, we didn't decrease the yields, because already in the past, when we were in lutte raisonnée, etc., we were already at the same level. You see, between 30 to 35 hectoliters. So unfortunately, for example, in our plot of Chaignots last year, we had a big decrease. It was not because it was organic; it was just because of the climate conditions. We lost probably half of the crop compared to 2018, which was a quite generous vintage.
Yes, I was looking at our allocation of Chaignots yesterday, and okay. I started crying, I think.
Give me a call. Don't talk to Delphine. Give me a call. I know she's attending the testing.
And it would be silly to have you here and not just also just to get your opinion on Chablis in 2019, because obviously you own a domain with, I think, with 54 hectares of vines, and I think you're the largest holder of Grand Cru in Chablis, isn't that right?
Just number 2, only 10 hectares.
Yeah, just 10. How good is Chablis 2019?
Here again, we were a little bit afraid in terms of the level of acidity, because it was a little bit low, but at the end, we achieve a great balance again. So yeah. There is a natural adaptability or adaptation. I'm not a guru, so I don't know the reasons, but this is what we see.
Perhaps one last question that Elena was asking, I was wondering about as well, the evolution of the Malconsort in bottle. What do you think will happen to it? Will it shut down, stay open?
No, we guess within one year and a half, it will be a little bit closer during maybe half a year, 1 year, and in 2 years and a half time, it will really, the expression will be, I think, gorgeous.
Mm. Is it a wine you could keep for 30 or 40 years without any problem?
It's not my recommendation, because when you keep the wine, you don't drink the wine. So, and we make wine to be drunk, not to be kept. No, so it's a bad joke, but buy a case of 24 bottles, drink 1 bottle every year. It's okay.
That sounds like a good plan. Thank you, ALBERIC. That was terrific. And that, I think that's another wine with lovely definition, punctuation, purity. Again, almost a coolness of fruit. I mean, it's clearly concentrated, but like so many of the wines we've tasted this evening, the delineation is really, really nice. I'm very wary when I taste Burgundy and I see the sunshine, that we will lose that sense of purity and Pinot. And it's here, it's beautiful. So well done. Thank you very much.